Please. Daily routine. I have been advised that there will be no late debate this evening. Presenting and reading of petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. I am pleased today to table the report of the Auditor General of Nova Scotia, House of Assembly, May 2011. The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take the opportunity to speak about Water for Life, Nova Scotia Water Resource Management Strategy. This beautiful province is blessed with more than 13,000 kilometres of coastline and many lakes, rivers, and wetlands and groundwater supplies. We are very fortunate when it comes to water, but it isn't a resource that we can take for granted. Like all Nova Scotians, this government cares about our water. We want to ensure it is safe, well protected, and properly used. Water is not an unlimited resource, but we know it needs careful attention and management, which is the focus of our water strategy. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia already has a strategy for managing drinking water. The drinking water strategy has resulted in upgrades to water treatment facilities that strengthen standards for water well construction and an even greater protection for municipal water supplies. In fact, a recent C.D. Howe Institute report by Dr. Stephen Hoody, one of Canada's leading drinking water experts, credited Nova Scotia for progress regarding safe drinking water and the quality of my department's drinking water program. The drinking water is just one way that water is essential to our daily lives. Mr. Speaker, our government understands that we need effective ways to manage our provincial water resources. The Environmental Act designates my department, Nova Scotia Environment, as the lead government agency to manage Nova Scotia water resources. Inspectors from our Environmental Monitoring and Compliance Division monitors, inspects, and enforce all approvals issued by Nova Scotia Environment related to water. The department issues approvals to anyone wishing to alter water courses, for example, by installing a culvert or a bridge or withdrawing large amounts of water. We also issue approvals for facilities that provide public drinking water, such as municipal water supplies. And we administrative approvals related to the protection of our water resources, such as those to industrial facilities and wastewater treatment plants. Mr. Speaker, during the last fiscal year, inspectors from our department completed nearly 4,000 inspections related to the protections of our water resources. This accounted for 42% of all inspections last year. Nova Scotia's Environment also has a dedicated water and wastewater branch with 19 staff and an annual operating budget of over $2 million. Our water branch provides policies and technical support on a wide range of water management activities. Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes that the water is essential to our health, our environment, and our economy. We are proud that with the launch of the Water for Life last December, Nova Scotia met its 2010 environmental goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act commitment to develop a water resource management strategy. The water strategy also supports the recent Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environmental Strategic Directions of Water and the Council for the Federation of Water Charter, which all premiers endorsed in 2010. Mr. Speaker, our Premier represents Nova Scotia on the Council of the Federation, which endorsed the Water Charter. Under the Premier's leadership, Nova Scotia became one of the co-leaders on the Deputy Minister's Working Group established to move the Water Charter forward. The Water for Life strategy will guide how we manage all our water resources in ways that will benefit all Nova Scotians. This strategy is a result of consultations with individuals, communities, and environmental groups, industry, Mi'kmaq, municipalities, and other government departments. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank everyone for contributing to the water strategy by participating in the consultation process. I would like to point out that Water for Life is an integrated approach. This 10-year plan provides a framework for today and into the future. In total, the strategy contains 29 actions, and these actions fall under 3 categories. Those that help us to better understand the quality and quantity of our water, and those that help us to protect the quality and quantity of our water, and those that help us engage others in caring for our water. The 10-year water strategy also divides these actions by timelines. There are actions for today, which will be carried out within the next 3 years, and actions for tomorrow, which will be carried out within the next 10 years. Mr. Speaker, we are very pleased to say that after only 4 months since the launch, some of the water strategy initiatives are already underway or even completed. Mr. Speaker, we provided grants and resources to universities like Dalhousie and St. Mary's to develop watershed and water monitoring projects that will benefit all Nova Scotians. We've launched the Nova Scotia Water Portal, a website that provides user-friendly online water information and resources. We're also working with environmental groups like Clean Nova Scotia and the Ecology Action Centre, who are monitoring and educating Nova Scotians about groundwater. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say that Water for Life secures Nova Scotia's role as a leader in the water resource management in Atlantic Canada and across this country. We are proud of Nova Scotia's water strategy and will help us to protect and manage our water today and for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the advance copy of his statement. Given he said nothing new since his announcement in December and there's been no action taken by the government on the strategy since then, will not be responding at this time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his comments today, and of course for the advance copy that we did get on it. Of course, we had the opportunity to question his Deputy Minister on this very water strategy, so I just thank him for bringing this to the attention of the House today.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak to you about crime prevention initiatives, of which I'm very proud of. There has been a lot of talk about crime prevention lately, Mr. Speaker, and questions about this government's commitment to these critical interventions. The Lighthouse Program, Mr. Speaker, is a crime prevention strategy that government committed to in 2009. It gets to the heart of our communities by helping 20 community partners provide direct support to youth. This grant program helps community organizations across the province-wide recreational, educational, cultural, and life skills programs for Nova Scotia's youth. Mr. Speaker, just this past April, we announced our final 5 funding partners. The program has reached its capacity of 20 community partnerships, each receiving $12,000 in funding. This is a $240,000 annual commitment, Mr. Speaker. The Lighthouse Program is an important part of our approach to crime prevention. In the past, we focused our most efforts on enforcement. Now, we know that this is not enough. I would argue that this efforts to prevent youth from ever becoming involved in criminal activity are just as important as enforcement laws that keep us safe. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, is that crime The face of crime is changing. So must we. We must learn to adapt our methods, discover new ones, and develop programs that will allow us to stay one step ahead. This means investing in programs that help our children to make the right choices. The Lighthouse program focuses on reducing youth involvement in the criminal justice system, promoting pro-social behavior and attitudes, fostering a high degree of interagency cooperation, and building knowledge of community risks and assets. Mr. Speaker, the evidence to support this approach is very clear. The better we can connect with our youth in positive activities and relationships, the better we are equipped. They will be able to withstand the negative pressures facing them on a daily basis. As I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, the Lighthouse program was $240,000 committed to support 20 partnerships across the province. These organizations provide a variety of programs to youth so that they can get involved or re-involved and not get involved in crime at all. These organizations located in a wide range of communities and offered in highly rural areas, urban neighborhoods, and in First Nations community. One example I'd like to come back to, Mr. Speaker, is the Youth on Radar program that is sponsored by J.L. Isley High School here in Halifax. This program uses art and recreation workshops to help engage disadvantaged youth. The goal is to help them to develop better fitness habits, artistic skills, and technological competence. The Youth on the Radar program has created a short video called Sprytown, which was shown at the Atlantic Film Festival. Mr. Speaker, they also painted a mural on our provincial court and were commissioned by the Supreme Court to create a mural for their main entrance under the mentorship of a sculptor from Nova Scotia College Art and Design. Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I did not mention the importance of community leadership, especially with respect to this program, but also overall, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, crime prevention is more effective at the community level. These organizations have the unique opportunity of knowing the issues that impact the youth in their communities, and they are able to tailor the programs to their needs. As a result, they have the powerful impact of guiding and directing these youth. Mr. Speaker, the program is successful because of the dedication and commitment of many people and organizations at the community level. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to say that we have seen very few early outcomes we have seen very good early outcomes in our Lighthouse program. As part of our evaluation process in January, we received reports from the first 15 funded partnerships. The reports, which track youth participation, show great results. There were more than 1,300 youth visits per month, which means there were more than 10,000 engagements with youth over the course of a year. These numbers and results are a great example of how a small investment in a number of multifaceted organizations can make a significant difference in the communities they serve. We must also remember that these organizations have strong ties to other community groups. Our Lighthouse programs partners report that more than 80 formal partnerships have been established to support their programs. At a time of fiscal restraint, working together in unity for a common cause produces results that we can all share and be proud of. Mr. Speaker, I am confident that through this program, with the help of our community partners, we are making and will continue to make a difference in the lives of Nova Scotians youth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, actions speak louder than words. At a time when violent crime is up by 7%, Halifax Regional Municipality, Nova Scotians are calling for action, not excuses. This government's action was to reduce justice funding by $5.3 million, including a reduction of $475,000 from discretionary, crime prevention, and restorative justice. Those are the facts. This government had a choice, and when it came to crime, it obviously takes a back seat under this NDP government. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And government is always faced with the question of whether to invest in justice or mercy. In justice, you invest in activities and institutions that punish people who commit crime, and that's very important. But it's also important to invest in protecting those who might fall into a lifestyle of crime. Now, I'm going to keep my remarks brief. I do know that in this program there is There is some focus, I believe it's called the youth leadership model, because we learned at public accounts about it, that there's a component where youth at risk are watching out for other youth at risk to protect them from activities that lead to crime. We think that's a good thing. One of the things I think is very important is that with this program, and I hope that it becomes part of it, and it's part of some of the projects that they fund, is that we target people, young people who may fall under the influence of those who are trying to take advantage of them. And what I'm referring to is young people who might come from poor or marginalized backgrounds, because there are people out there who prey on people like that. And we have to watch out for those young people. So, Mr. Speaker, I do hope that the government can track some decreases in the youth crime in some of the communities where this program is active, and attempting to do that. So we look forward to the results of that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia could take pride in their unique and diverse history and culture. In communities across the province, museums are working hard to preserve that history and tell our stories. Mr. Speaker, this is a very exciting day for the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. Today, the museum is making history as it holds the North American premiere of the exhibit, Hello Sailor, Gay Life on the Ocean Wave. Mr. Speaker, it has been a long journey for this exhibit to come to Halifax. The journey began with the experiences of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people over half a century ago. Mr. Speaker, their stories lay hidden for much of the past 60 years, until Dr. Jo Stanley and her colleague Paul Baker brought them to life in 2003 in the book Hello Sailor, The Hidden History of Gay Life at Sea. Their book chronicles the experiences of gay crew members on cruise ships and naval vessels that sailed out of England and often stopping in Halifax. Mr. Speaker, the book led to the creation of Hello Sailor, exhibit by the Merseyside Museum in Liverpool, England in 2006. It ensures the story of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex mariners were brought together for the public to appreciate. And now, Mr. Speaker, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic has brought Hello Sailor to Nova Scotia and added local content to make it even more relevant to Nova Scotians. I've had the pleasure this morning of attending a preview of the exhibit this morning at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, and it truly is an impressive experience, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Hello Sailor exhibit is enhanced by the contribution of Dr. Stanley, who is guest curator for the North American debut. Nova Scotia is fortunate to have her experience and knowledge increase our understanding to our maritime heritage, Mr. Speaker. This is what our museums do best. They bring forward unique parts of our history that have never been talked about or shown before. They help us to understand how diverse our culture and history make Nova Scotia such an incredible place to live and work and raise a family. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage has a mandate to support strong and vibrant communities throughout the province. We do that in part by ensuring that our diverse culture and heritage is accurately and fairly presented in our museums. Mr. Speaker, none of that would be possible without the hard work and dedication of museum staff throughout the province. They do a remarkable job in interpreting and presenting our history to a varied audience, Mr. Speaker. The Maritime Museum of the Atlantic is one of the top attractions for visitors to our province. Thanks to the imagination, skill, and knowledge of the staff at the museum, there is now another reason for people to come to Halifax waterfront to see the Hello Sailor exhibit. Mr. Speaker, I urge all members of the House and all Nova Scotians to take advantage of this unique opportunity Hello Sailor provides to learn more about our maritime heritage. And Mr. Speaker, as Nova Scotians and their visitors set out to enjoy all our province has to offer during the summer months, I encourage them to visit their museums and share in the culture of lifelong learning that they support, Mr. Speaker. We all benefit from the excellent work our museum staff, their attention to details of our heritage helps us make life better for families across the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for sending us an advanced copy of the statement today. And as the Minister stated, this is what our museums do best, bring forward parts of our past that most people and a lot of us don't know about. So, Mr. Speaker, our museums can teach us many things, and this exhibit will surely teach some people a thing or two that a lot of us never knew about. So, with that, I'll take my seat. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too would like to thank the Minister for providing our caucus with his comments ahead of time. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia was shaped by the sea. It's played a role in history and culture, and the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic also has a rich history. We have no doubt that museum staff will ensure this exhibit is shown in a way that's respectful of the unique perspective presented, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in this Assembly to share information on several chapters of the Auditor General's report that focus on the Department of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, nothing is more important to Nova Scotians than health care. And we know that families value the health care services they receive, and that the money we invest in health care must be spent wisely and carefully. When our government came into office, we became aware of the escalating cost of the replacement of the Colchester Regional Hospital in Truro. As Health Minister, it concerned me gravely that the cost of this project had grown so much. In 2005, the government of the day had approved $104 million for the hospital, $78 million from the taxpayers of Nova Scotia, with $26 million provided through the fundraising of the community for that total cost of $104 million. 1 year later, it was clear that that initial estimate was wrong. In 2007, the government of the day approved an additional $51 million. Then in 2008, it approved an additional $3.9 million for an MRI unit. When this government took office, $155 million had been spent, and we only had a shell of a hospital with no plumbing, no electrical, no air, the other services you would expect in a hospital. In the first few months of becoming health minister, I was being asked for additional funds to complete the mechanical and electrical work that had been underestimated. In February 2010, this government approved an additional $24.4 million for the completion of the hospital, bringing the total budget to $184.6 million. Mr. Speaker, when a project runs so seriously over budget as this one did, something had to be done. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I requested through Treasury Board that our Auditor General, Jacques Lapointe, undertake an audit on the Colchester Hospital. Today, Mr. Speaker, we are welcoming his 14 recommendations. These recommendations are very helpful to the department. And Mr. Speaker, they're very helpful to the department, not only because they give us some insight into what occurred with respect to the Colchester Hospital, but they help us understand if we are to meet our infrastructure costs in our healthcare system, which are substantial, Mr. Speaker. If you talk to people in the Capital District Health Authority or at the IWK, in the Pictou County District Health Authority, indeed across the province, you will know that there are many capital requests and many projects that are in front of us. So there are many lessons learned in this report that can be applied to manage projects appropriately in the future. I want to share with the House some of the specific recommendations the Auditor General is making that the Department of Health and Wellness accepts, agrees with, and have already begun implementing. Mr. Speaker, we're developing a process to review the preliminary budget and approve final projects. We're preparing a comprehensive assessment of the funding required to operate the new facility, which is designed as a replacement facility for a hospital which is very, very out of date. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we have identified ways to manage costs. We will be using, for example, existing furniture and equipment from the current hospital in an attempt to be prudent and apply principles of good fiscal management. The department has also been advised that it should ensure managers in charge of capital projects review and challenge key estimates prepared by consultants. And I want to assure the House and the members that we now have a robust infrastructure management group within the department of 6 engineers. During the start of the Colchester project, there was only 1 engineer, and there is also a financial advisor dedicated to this project. The Auditor General recommended that Treasury Board assign responsibility to a central organization of government that has some expertise with respect to the management of such large projects. And Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that a memorandum of understanding between the Departments of Health and Wellness and Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal is in the final stages. So the organization and expertise that's required can oversee health infrastructure projects. The Auditor General also asked that Health and Wellness sign a contract including clear responsibilities and reporting requirements with its project manager for the Colchester Hospital replacement project. And Mr. Speaker, I agree with this recommendation and can report that our legal department is currently drafting that contract. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn now to the chapter in the report on long-term care. The Department of Health and Wellness agrees with the Auditor General's 7 recommendations pertaining to new and replacement long-term care facilities and is working hard to implement suggested changes. One of the key recommendations which we accept is the need to have greater transparency in making decisions regarding which nursing home projects are selected as having the greatest urgency with respect to new facilities or replacement facilities. I'm pleased to note, however, that the Auditor General did find that the department used a detailed needs analysis to determine how many long-term care beds were needed and where, and that the department had an extensive process to develop the request for proposals and to evaluate the various responses or bids that came in on the various projects. However, I would say, Mr. Speaker, that the Auditor General also raised questions with respect that there were so many untendered projects with respect to replacement beds. and recommended that we consider not approaching any further developments in this way, and this is something we will have to consider very carefully, Mr. Speaker. We are pleased that we have built 12 new facilities and 8 additions to existing facilities throughout Nova Scotia and replaced 3 facilities, creating 838 new long-term care beds and replacing 238 existing beds. Seniors and their families are helped by these services, and this year we will open 169 more new beds, 593 replacement nursing home beds. But still, Mr. Speaker, we recognize the need for greater transparency in the decision-making on which projects are selected, and to ensure that those that merit the greatest need are first in the queue, Mr. Speaker. As well, the department began using service agreements in 2006 for all new and replacement beds, and within a year, Mr. Speaker, we'll have service agreements for other long-term care facilities as well, another recommendation of the Auditor General's. Mr. Speaker, we realize that we have more work to do in our area of continuing care and addressing outstanding recommendations from the Auditor General. Work has begun on identifying recommendations that have not been fully implemented. And again, Mr. Speaker, I believe we must be accountable with health care funding, and I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Health, that I and this government are working very hard to use the funds we have prudently and effectively. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for a copy of her statement in advance. The one portion of the Auditor General's report that the Minister neglected to speak to directly is Chapter 2, which indicates how well departments are doing in implementing earlier recommendations of the Auditor General. And the Department of Health stood out as having only 36% of their recommendations implemented after, and these are recommendations that came between 2005 and 2008, so they're many years ago. They have only implemented 36% of those recommendations, so one can only hope that they'll do better with this report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In a few short words, of course, the Colchester Hospital is one that is important to that area to have the updated facility that they so deserve. Ultimately, when this first got going, if you look at the community was able to raise somewhere near $25 million, where the original estimate for the hospital was sort of extrapolated from that issue, which was somewhere near the $100,000 range. Mr. Speaker, the controls within the department were such that we didn't have the expertise in which to guide us along this process, one that I know that that expertise has changed over time and that they do now have it. The thing that the minister didn't say, though, is that they'll probably require more money to complete that hospital because today they're still waiting to complete it. There's still mechanicals and electricals left to do in that hospital. So I would suggest to the minister that she be ready for the next ask for the Colchester Hospital. Number two, when it comes to the long-term care program, even with all this build-out, because it's only a partial of the original continuing care plan, that there are still wait times, wait lists for these facilities, and that we still need to continue the expansion of the program and having more capacity for people searching for placement for their loved ones in our long-term care system. So with that, I thank the minister for her comments, and I wish her well in adopting the recommendations by the Auditor General. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you. Me too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's my hope that my colleagues across the floor got their statements in a timely way. I rise today to speak to the Auditor General's report and its recommendations on the Registry of Motor Vehicles. First of all, I'd like to thank the Auditor General for his extensive work in reviewing this registry. The independent view provided by the Auditor General's office will help us improve our processes and our systems. Mr. Speaker, at Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations, we're always looking for ways to improve. My department takes road safety and the security of Nova Scotians' personal information very seriously. I'd like to point out that the Auditor General has not identified any breach of private or sensitive information from the Registry of Motor Vehicles. What he has done, Mr. Speaker, is show us some areas where we can improve by increasing our controls, by not collecting and storing personal information we do not need, and by monitoring and better managing access to our registry system. Mr. Speaker, we agree with those recommendations, and we have reinforced our existing policy that we will not store credit card information as part of a client's transaction record. We are happy to have these recommendations, Mr. Speaker, so we can further ensure that our policies protect Nova Scotians' personal information. I'd also like to touch on our inspection process for a moment. Nova Scotia is one of the few provinces in Canada that requires a regular motor vehicle inspection. Many provinces only require that a vehicle be inspected when it enters their borders or when it's sold. Our regular inspections are an important tool in promoting road safety. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General recommended that we improve our auditing of the 1,200 licensed inspection stations across Nova Scotia. Currently, we respond to complaints about specific inspection stations and periodically audit some stations. During the period of time the Auditor General was reviewing the Registry of Motor Vehicles, we audited 294 inspection stations. However, we accept the Auditor General's recommendation and will move to a risk-based audit plan that will give us more uniform coverage. We will consider new ways to ensure that inspection station and tester licenses are timely and complete, and that they renew their licenses before they expire. As the Auditor General has recommended, we will strengthen the process by which motor vehicle inspection booklets are issued and reconciled. We will update our inspectors' manual and policies to provide clear guidance to motor vehicle inspectors. And we will also provide clear guidance on enforcement to our inspectors to help them determine the best course of action if they encounter vehicle safety inspection violations. Mr. Speaker, this month we will begin a comprehensive review of motor vehicle compliance operations, and I'd like to mention that my department also performs roadside inspections of passenger vehicles at upwards of 35 checkpoints per year. We screen many thousands of vehicles at these checkpoints, and if there are visible defects or a vehicle appears to be in poor condition, we do a further inspection. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General's recommendations will help us strengthen what we feel is an already strong road safety program. The Auditor General also pointed out our need for a policy ensuring that our driver enhancement officers who perform all driver's tests in the province have a valid driver's license and a clean driving record at all times. And I'm happy to say that we have already implemented that recommendation. We always check to ensure that our driver examiners had a valid driver's license and a clean driving record when they were hired. In March, we put a policy in place to ensure that we check that information annually. Mr. Speaker, as part of this process, we reviewed the driving records of all our driver examiner staff and determined that over the last 5 years, they have all held valid licenses and safe driving records. The Auditor General also recommended that we put in place standards to ensure we regularly review and act on the records of some drivers whose behavior makes them a higher risk on our roads. So, Mr. Speaker, we agree with this recommendation, and over the next 18 months, we will develop a set of standards, compliance procedures, and a plan for implementing them. We will also ensure that there is a common set of criteria that can be used in assessing
these drivers' records. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the Auditor General's recommendation and the opportunity he has provided us to review and improve our processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister for the advanced copy of his announcement. I would say, though, that the security in the computer systems in the province seems to be an ongoing problem with the Auditor General in different departments. And how can we expect the government to keep information such as birth dates and addresses that are proposed in the new Elections Act confidential when they can't keep the everyday information confidential? Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for providing us with his remarks ahead of time today, earlier today. And I know that the recommendations that the Auditor General made, Nova Scotians expect that these matters will be addressed, and we expect that the Minister and his department will be sincere in addressing those recommendations. And we also would like to recommend that they be done in a timely fashion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to spend a few minutes talking about today's report from the Auditor General, which contains a chapter on the Office of the Fire Marshal. Responsibility for the Office of the Fire Marshal falls under the Department of Labour and Advanced Education. The report contains 25 recommendations that cover the areas of management information, monitoring of fire inspection activities in municipalities, inspection, compliance and enforcement, and fire safety education. I want to assure everyone in the House, as well as the public, that government takes this report seriously and will act quickly. In fact, we are already acting. By the end of this year, the department will have addressed the majority of the recommendations in the report, or will be well underway to completing them. The last will be addressed within 18 months. We have appointed a project director who has developed a working plan to address each of the recommendations. We have started an inventory of buildings which require fire inspections. We have implemented daily and monthly reporting routines. Our IT staff is planning an interim management information system. We have worked out an agreement to ensure all public schools will be inspected as required under legislation. We will continue to ensure that fire and safety systems are maintained in accordance with the code. Mr. Speaker, the dedicated professionals working at the Office of the Fire Marshal help protect the public from fire safety risks. The job of Labour and Advanced Education is to address the deficiencies identified in the Auditor General's report. This is a priority and it will be done quickly. The Auditor General's report makes clear that progress was lacking in addressing previous audit findings with the Office of the Fire Marshal. Senior management at Labour and Advanced Education is committed to ensuring all the recommendations contained in this latest report are addressed and quickly. When the audit began last summer, the department started to take action that would improve fire prevention and investigation in this province. Last March, a project director was appointed who immediately began developing a working plan for those improvements. That plan addresses each of the recommendations contained in the audit. We've been working with staff at the Office of the Fire Marshal to improve record keeping and reporting. We are developing a checklist that will be signed by each Deputy Fire Marshal. We will ensure the development of an orientation and training policy based on best practices and existing programs within the department. Guidelines will be developed for inspections to ensure there is consistency. We will develop timeframes for building owners to address any deficiencies found during an inspection. The Department of Labour and Advanced Education and the Department of Education have agreed that all public schools will be inspected as required under legislation. The Office of the Fire Marshal will inspect schools outside of HRM, and municipal fire inspectors will inspect schools located within HRM. Our goal is to work with the Department of Education and school boards so that all schools will eventually be doing self-inspections, and the Office of the Fire Marshal will then audit the inspection process. Responsibility for oversight of municipal fire inspection activities falls under the province, and we have started discussions with our colleagues at Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations about areas of the report that involve municipalities. We will ensure the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities is consulted. Together, we will look at ways to cooperate and coordinate so everyone is working together to ensure public safety. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to assure everyone again that we are going to fix the issues identified in this report. We have already taken action in a number of areas, and most of the recommendations will be addressed or underway by the end of this year. We will issue progress reports so everyone can see what action is being taken to address the recommendations. Mr. Speaker, public safety is a priority, and we are now acting to improve fire prevention and investigation in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Minister for providing remarks for the ministerial statement in advance. It's evident by all the ministerial statements today that the government is worried about the fallout from the Auditor General's report, and they should be. The chapter in the Office of the Fire Marshal is really quite appalling. They don't know what they've inspected, what they need to inspect, and whether anything has been done as a result of their previous inspections. They are not protecting the public. Schools have been the subject of a jurisdictional dispute between the municipalities and the province. Mr. Speaker, I have a lot more to say on this issue, but I'll save that for question period. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too would like to thank the Minister for providing our caucus with her comments ahead of time. Mr. Speaker, public safety is as critical an issue as any government will face. So we're pleased to see that the Minister has given it her prompt attention, and will be reviewing her comments and continue to follow up on the progress of how and when these recommendations are addressed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas recently 5 new partners from across Nova Scotia have signed on to the Lighthouse program to help keep youth from becoming involved in crime, and whereas from building a mural for the Supreme Court to getting after-school support with math and reading, and Lighthouse program partners offer many activities to keep young people away from crime, and whereas the new partners complete government's commitment of 20 renewable partnerships at 12,000 each for a total of investment of 240,000. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize positive the impact Lighthouse programs have on 1,300 youth per month in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Voluntary Sector.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Threads of Life is a national charitable organization that is helping more than 1,200 Canadian family members deal with a workplace death or a life-altering work-related injury or disease. And whereas the contributions made by volunteers has an impact across the province each and every day. And whereas Steps for Life is an annual event organized by that organization that helps us remember those who were injured or killed on the job and reinforces our resolve not to let their deaths be in vain. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate and thank the hundreds of men, women, girls and boys who participated in Steps for Life events in Halifax, Windsor and Sydney on May 1st and in Antigonish on May 15th, raising thousands of dollars to support the work of Threads of Life. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas building and maintaining roads creates thousands of jobs, allows local businesses to transport goods, connects Nova Scotians and leads visitors to every corner of our beautiful province. Whereas hundreds of men and women will be working hard this construction season, improving roads across Nova Scotia. And whereas the province, Nova Scotia Highway Workers Union, and the Nova Scotia Road Builders are working together to promote the safety of these workers who must often carry out their work in high traffic areas. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in asking all Nova Scotia drivers and visitors from across the continent and the rest of the country to help keep road builders safe by reducing speeds, being patient, and using caution in work zones. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May 17th, seniors and youth working together to make life better in their communities were recognized with the presentation of the Intergenerational Awards. And whereas the recipients of the Intergenerational Award are wonderful volunteers who promote the importance of youth and seniors working together to make their communities better. And whereas awards were presented to the Beaver Bank Keswick Senior Association, Katie Don Reassure of Badek, and Jocelyn Morris of Cumberland County. And that was for their outstanding contributions, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Beaver Bank Keswick Senior Association, Katie Don, and Jocelyn Morris for receiving the Intergenerational Awards on May 17th, and thank them for their work in the community. Mr. Speaker, I do request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Monsieur le Président, je me lève en tant que ministre des Affaires acadiennes. Monsieur le Président, à une date ultérieure, j'ai l'intention de proposer l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que plus de 700 jeunes participeront aux Jeux de l'Acadie de la Nouvelle-Écosse qui se dérouleront cette fin de semaine à Greenwood, dans la région de la vallée de l'Annapolis, et attendu que les Jeux régionaux sont un événement spécial qui rassemble toutes les régions acadiennes de la Nouvelle-Écosse, et attendu que les Jeux de l'Acadie contribuent au développement du leadership et de l'excellence dans les sports chez la jeunesse francophone et acadienne. Qu'il soit résolu que cette Chambre souhaite bon succès à tous les athlètes qui participeront aux Jeux régionaux de l'Acadie et remercie les bénévoles pour leur contribution au développement de la jeunesse francophone et acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Et Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas more than 700 young people will be participating in the Acadian Games, Les Jeux de l'Acadie, being held in Greenwood in the Annapolis Valley this weekend. And whereas the Acadian Games is a special event that brings together youth from Acadian communities across Nova Scotia, and whereas the Acadian Games contribute to the development of leadership skills and athletic achievement among young Acadians and Francophones, therefore be it resolved that this House wish success to the young athletes taking part in the Acadian Games and thank all volunteers for their commitment to the development of young Acadians and Francophones from across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tuesday, May 17th, was World Hypertension Day, and whereas hypertension or high blood pressure damages blood vessels and significantly increases the risk of stroke, heart attack, and kidney disease, and whereas almost 1/3 of Nova Scotian adults have been diagnosed with high blood pressure, a preventable, measurable, and controllable illness, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me and acknowledge the importance of knowing your numbers and having your blood pressure checked regularly by a healthcare provider. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the following resolution. Whereas the Truro Farmers Market opened for the season on Saturday, May 14, 2011, and whereas despite the rain, more than 1,500 people visited the market on its opening day to browse the selections offered by 30 vendors. And whereas farmers markets are great places to find fresh and local products, meet friends and neighbours, and take home unique crafts and wares. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the organisers of the Truro Farmers Market for a successful opening day of May 14, 2011, and wish them continued good luck through the rest of the season. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Envirothon opened on Thursday, May the 12th at the Acadia University, and whereas the Envirothon is an environmental education program for high school students where teams work together to develop their knowledge of the ecology and natural resource management, and whereas students from Avon High School placed first in the competition and will represent Nova Scotia in the International Canyon Envirothon in Sackville, New Brunswick this July. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate the students of Avon High School for their success and wish them all the best in the international competition. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Archaeological Association is holding its 44th annual conference in Halifax at the Lord Nelson Hotel starting today and runs till Sunday, May 22nd. And whereas it is fitting that the CAA has chosen Halifax as a site for their annual conference, as they will hear presenters talk about the latest work happening here in Nova Scotia to preserve and interpret Mi'kmaq culture and heritage, explore the impacts of the European trade on Aboriginal culture, and consider the relationships between the environment and human communities. And whereas this government supports the work of the Nova Scotia Archaeology Society, which has been facilitating the work of archaeologists, both amateur and professional, since 1987. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate and welcome the delegates of the Canadian Archaeological Association and wish them a successful annual conference and encourage them to visit all parts of Nova Scotia during their stay. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 2/3 of the surface of the planet is ocean, and the better we understand how to safely and reliably harness its energy potential, the sooner we'll see the benefits to both our economy and our environment. And whereas Nova Scotia has set some of the most aggressive renewable targets in the world with a plan to quadruple our supply by 2020, and whereas today at the All Energy Conference in Aberdeen, Scotland, Mr. John Woods, Chairman of Nova Scotia's own Fundy Ocean Research Centre for Excellence, and Mr. Richard Morris, Commercial Director of the European Marine Energy Centre, signed a strategic agreement to work together to coordinate their research efforts. Therefore, be it resolved, the House offers its congratulations to all involved and commends this step as a sign of the continuing momentum around tidal energy development in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotians working to prevent crime and make their communities safer were recognized at the 25th Annual Atlantic Crime Prevention Conference in Halifax last week, and whereas a committee reviewed nominations from across the province and selected 10 recipients based on their commitment to local issues, empowering their community leadership by encouraging and educating others, working together to build partnerships and innovation, inclusiveness and flexibility. Whereas all Nova Scotians should honour and recognize individuals and organizations dedicated to preventing crime who are making a difference in their communities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate this year's winners of the Minister's Leadership Award for Crime Prevention and thank them for their hard work and dedication to a very worthwhile cause. Mr. Speaker, I request a waive of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the province of Nova Scotia has a vibrant and successful arts and culture community that includes, to mention a few, members of the dance, theatre, craft, visual arts and music sector. And whereas this government announced the 5-point plan for arts and culture sector in February of this year, which called for the creation of Art Nova Scotia, which will be an independent body to oversee funding that will go directly to artists. And whereas this government announced yesterday the names of the members of the Transition Committee for Arts Nova Scotia, which has a mandate to recommend terms of references to set out Arts Nova Scotia's purpose, the roles and responsibility of members, and to recommend criteria for appointment to the body. And whereas this committee will be chaired by Ministerial Assistant, the Honourable Member for Lunenburg. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate and welcome Paul Caskey, Artistic Director with Live Art Dance Production, Leah Hamilton of Genesis Consulting, and Christopher Shore, the Executive Director of Theatre Nova Scotia, for the giving of their time to contribute to the establishment of Arts Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Voluntary Sector.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas over 24,000 Nova Scotians are employed by the voluntary and non-profit sector, and whereas voluntary sector and non-profit organizations provide essential services to individuals across the province, and whereas the Voluntary Sector Professional Capacity Trust is accepting applications until the end of the month for funding from voluntary sector and non-profit organizations to support developing human resource policies, business planning, and assessing their needs. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House join me in encouraging all eligible voluntary sector and non-profit organizations to apply to the Voluntary Sector Professional Capacity Trust and access funding to strengthen their workforce and grow their capacity in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed May 15th of every year as the International Day of Families, providing an occasion to celebrate the importance of families around the world. And whereas the Department of Community Services plays a key role in providing programs and services for families across Nova Scotia, and whereas those government programs aim to increase awareness and understanding and promote policies that will make life better for families in every region. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in recognizing and celebrating families of all shapes and sizes and their importance in our society. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 16th to 22nd marks Victorian Order of Nurses Week in Canada, and whereas the Victorian Order of Nurses have been providing health services in Canada for more than 100 years, and whereas there are more than 14,000 staff and volunteers providing care to more than 1,200 communities from coast to coast, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me in recognizing and celebrating the important role and contribution that VON staff and volunteers provide, not just this week, but 365 days a year. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the following resolution. Whereas the Apple Blossom Festival is an agricultural celebration held each year to recognize the Annapolis Valley region's tradition and heritage of apple production. Whereas experts predict trees will be adorned with signature apple blossoms in time for the festival in spite of a recent spell of cool temperatures and above average moisture. And whereas hundreds of volunteers spend many months organizing and promoting the Apple Blossom Festival and making it a family festival that's well known across Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly wish all Apple Blossom Festival organizers and volunteers and the greater Annapolis Valley community great success with the 2011 festival. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2011 Park Events Guide highlights more than 180 educational opportunities and fun outdoor activities in our provincial parks from May 2011 to March 2012. And whereas our improved park system, wilderness areas, nature reserves, and crown land provide an affordable way for families and friends to spend quality time together and discover Nova Scotia's natural beauty. And whereas the Park Events Guide, which lists attractions for all ages and activities for everyone, is a cooperative effort by government agencies, recreation clubs, interested people, and community organizations, and is coordinated by the Department of Natural Resources. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of this House encourage and join their fellow Nova Scotians in discovering nature this year by participating in events at provincial parks that promote a healthy, active lifestyle. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Resource Recovery Fund Board's recent celebration or celebrated their 11th annual Nova Scotia Recyclables Essay Contest, and whereas this annual initiative is to inspire youth to participate in recycling and composting programs and to celebrate Nova Scotia's reputation as a leader in waste reduction. And whereas over 8,000 entries were received demonstrating the importance that young Nova Scotians place on the protection of our environment, one being the grand prize winner, Joss McKenna, essay, Paper Doesn't Grow on Trees. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate all who participate and the grand prize winner, Joss McKinnon, for his outstanding and thoughtful essay, Paper Doesn't Grow on Trees. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. Notices of motion. The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas brothers Sean O'Neill and Ryan O'Neill of Halifax recently represented Canada at the International Taekwondo Federation World Championships in Wellington, New Zealand, and whereas 15-year-old Sean and 14-year-old Ryan won a silver medal in junior men's team patterns, and Sean won a bronze medal in junior men's patterns for third-degree black belts. And whereas they trained 7 days a week for more than a year with Canadian National Taekwondo team coach Ken McKenzie of McKenzie Taekwondo in Bedford to prepare for this competition. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Sean O'Neill, Ryan O'Neill, and Ken McKenzie on their international recognition and wish them success in all future athletic endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas, in November of 2009, Chuck and Donna Cornelius of Cambridge Kings County, owners of Chuck's Auto Repair and Service, Nova Scotia, initiated a program called Undercoat for Kids. And whereas the Undercoat for Kids program was designed to help children who are less fortunate at the local schools obtain the proper winter clothing and footwear necessary to live comfortably in our valley winters. And whereas a percentage of each undercoating completed at Chuck's Auto Repair and Service goes towards this program that has provided nearly 70 children in the past 2 years with proper winter gear. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Chuck and Donna Cornelius for their efforts to help children with appropriate winter clothing in the communities of Colebrook and Cambridge, Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Jim Spatz is a Halifax entrepreneur and philanthropist who has contributed immeasurably to the economic, social, and cultural fabric of Nova Scotia, and whereas Dr. Jim Spatz has demonstrated his commitment to our community through his involvement in a wide range of community organizations and causes, including the Atlantic Jewish Council, the Parker Street Food and Furniture Bank, Neptune Theatre, and Point Pleasant Park Restoration, to name a few. And whereas, in addition to contributing his time and considerable talents, Dr. Spatz provides vital financial support to various educational initiatives, most recently through the establishment of an endowed chair in Jewish Studies at Dalhousie University, as well as his generous gift to the Citadel Theatre Society, which has enabled the opening of the Spatz Theatre at Citadel High School. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes Dr. Jim Spatz for his wide-ranging and generous community support, which helps elevate the quality of life and opportunities for Nova Scotian families, particularly our students. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the annual Hubtown Youth Fun Run was initiated 5 years ago by Dr. Barry Wheeler, a retired family physician, to promote physical activity among youth and to bring awareness about health concerns relating to childhood obesity. And whereas the Youth Fun Run continues each year with the support of local physicians, including Doctors Mike and Roya Murray, event organizers, the Colchester East Hants Health Authority, Mo Dunn of the Big Dog radio station, and many community volunteers. And whereas this year the School Spirit Award, which acknowledges the school that demonstrates the best participation and has the best spirit, was awarded to the Truro Elementary School for having 130 students and 6 teachers take part in the run this year. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates the Truro Elementary School for being this year's recipient of the Hubtown Youth Fun Run School Spirit Award and thanks them for their participation in recognizing the importance of physical activity as it relates to good health. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 1996, Fisherman's Cove in Eastern Passage was developed as a tourist attraction to highlight a restored and working fishing village with gift shops and restaurants promoting the rich culture and heritage of the local area. Whereas changes in the board of directors have brought new and exciting ideas and energy to face the substantial challenges of the association and to increase the success of this icon of the community. And whereas new board members Tom Harms, Dorothy White, Jamie Cox, Marie Morash, Wayne Eddy, Kevin DeVoe, and Anna Horsnell-Wade are committed to working with local elected officials, community partners, marketing, tourism, and economic development specialists to further develop the new goals and visions of the organization. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate members of the new Board of Fisherman's Cove Development Association for their commitment to re-energize this icon of the community and wishes them many, many more years of success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas architect Omar Gandhi of Halifax and contractor Deborah Herman Spartanelli of Queens County have come together on a truly unique project in Liverpool. And whereas the Cedar in 3 Textures project reconciles traditional building techniques and materials with contemporary style, design, and function in a family home. And whereas the Cedar in 3 Textures marry 100-year-old classic Nova Scotian architecture to 21st century ideals, incorporating sustainable features including solar panels, energy-efficient foam insulation, and high-efficiency boilers. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognizes and congratulates Omar Gandhi and Deborah Herman Spartanelli for their creative collaboration, which has resulted in a unique and innovative family home. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Helpline Society of Pictou County has been providing 24-hour service and referrals to residents of Pictou County and beyond for 28 years, and whereas the staffing of the Pictou County Helpline has been through the volunteerism of hundreds of Pictou County residents who have the desire to help others, and whereas the province of Nova Scotia is establishing a province-wide 211 helpline because of the importance of this type of service to all residents, and through the course of time, the Pictou County helpline may be dissolved or integrated into the new system. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly acknowledge the commitment of volunteers for the past 28 years and extend congratulations to the board, staff, and volunteers for the work of the Helpline Society of Pictou County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the oceans and rivers of the world have provided the earliest and still often the easiest way to transport goods over great distances, and maritime shipping is at the heart of Nova Scotia's economy. And whereas the Company of Master Mariners of Canada is a professional association for those qualified to command, established to encourage and maintain high and honourable standards within the nautical profession, and further the efficiency of the sea service and uphold the status, dignity and prestige of Master Mariners. And whereas next month the International Federation of Shipmasters Associations will meet in Halifax, and the Maritime Division of the Company of Master Mariners will host an introductory conference chaired by Maritime's Divisional Master Captain Rick Gates, focusing on environmental issues associated with the carriage of goods by sea. Therefore, be it resolved that this House commends Captain Rick Gates and the Company of Master Mariners of Canada for hosting this conference at the Westin Hotel June 7th and 8th, entitled Shipping and Environmental Issues in 2011, What More Can Be Done, and wish attendees all best in their continued quest to provide safe, secure and environmentally responsible movement of goods around the world. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas National Nursing Week was celebrated from May 9th to 15th, during which time the College of Registered Nurses of Nova Scotia announced the recipients of the 2011 Excellence in Nursing Awards, And whereas Patricia Hawley, an associate professor in the St. Francis Xavier University School of Nursing, was one of the Excellence in Nursing Education Award recipients. And whereas Patricia Hawley brings extensive nursing experience to the classroom setting, and her peers acknowledge her excellence in teaching, having previously awarded her the St. Francis Xavier University Research, Publication, and Teaching Award in 2007. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House congratulate Patricia Hawley on receiving a 2011 Excellence in Nursing Award and thank all nurses for their dedication and continued provision of care. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas when Karen Marks took over as president of the Lawrencetown Community Centre, she really wanted to improve the operation, so the management team looked at all possible ways to save energy and make their hall energy efficient. Whereas they started with Conserve Nova Scotia Cleaner, Greener program and changed lids in the exit signs and all bulbs to CFLs, engaging all user groups to make sure they turn the lights off. And whereas the community centre's management team used some of their very lean budget to buy an Energy Star fridge, a freezer from Sears Bargain Centre, and to place a 30-year-old fridge and chest freezer. Also partnering with Nova Scotia Power to upgrade the lights to energy-efficient bulbs and ballasts. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature commends Karen Marks and the Lawrencetown Community Centre management team for their commitment in reducing costs and energy efficiency at the Lawrencetown Community Centre. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Get them straight up. There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mrs. Gladys Vino recently celebrated her 90th birthday with an open house at the United Church in Bridgewater, and whereas we recognize the important contribution our seniors have made to raising their families and building our communities, and whereas we value all seniors and the myriad of contributions they've made to build the social fabric of this province, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mrs. Vino and wish her all the best on achieving this important and impressive chronological milestone. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Brittany Lewis of Amherst, Nova Scotia, recently graduated from St. Francis Xavier University with a Bachelor of Science and has plans to attend medical school to become a doctor. And whereas Brittany Lewis will travel to Ecuador this month to volunteer with an international organization called Aid Abroad. Whereas Brittany Lewis will get some invaluable hands-on experience volunteering in a medical clinic, taking vital signs and assisting with routine medical procedures. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly wish Brittany Lewis luck and success in her experience in Ecuador, volunteering as a medical clinic, and with her future career in medicine. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Justin Smith of Hammonds Plains is a management major at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, and a junior forward with the Engineers, their men's hockey team. And whereas on May 7th, 2011, Justin was recognized for an enthusiastic participation in the team's volunteer program with the Community Service Award, and whereas community service and volunteerism are commendable endeavors and vital components to every society. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate Justin Smith of Hammonds Plains on receiving the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute Engineers Community Service Award and wishes him best of luck in all of his future endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Institute of Planners, or CIP, represents 7,800 professional planners across Canada, maintains a code of professional practice for planners, and sets national standards for training, certification, and best practices. And whereas CIP announced yesterday the 2011 winners of its Great Places in Canada competition, which is a national recognition program to recognize the work of professional planners and to celebrate the great places in this country. And whereas the historic Hydrostone neighborhood, built in Halifax's North End in the aftermath of the devastating Halifax explosion of 1917, was named the second place winner in the category of great neighborhoods. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate the Halifax Regional Municipality, the residents of the Hydrostone area, and all those who visit or shop in this beautiful, unique neighborhood for their ongoing contributions to making the Hydrostone neighborhood one of Canada's great places. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Timberlea Titans Football Association has a great tradition of involving young athletes in the sport of football and winning an occasional championship. Whereas the Timberlea Titans registration for the football season is now underway. And whereas the success of the Timberlea Titans football program can be attributed to the steadfast support of the parents, coaches, and volunteers, and the level of community support. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Timberlea Titans football program on their past successes with wishes of good luck in the upcoming football season. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian-Lebanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Nova Scotia is an organization committed to the development and growth of economic and commercial relations between Canada and Lebanon. And whereas the community of Nova Scotians tracing their origins back to Lebanon is large and vibrant and has added immensely to the society and economy of Nova Scotia. And whereas the Chamber is holding its 4th annual Cedar and Maple Gala on May 19th at Pier 21 in Halifax, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulates the Canadian-Lebanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Nova Scotia on its work building bridges between Canada and Lebanon, and wishes the Chamber's members much continued success. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in the Lions Clubs of Nova Scotia, May of each year is designated Recycle for Sight Month, and whereas each Lions Club in the King South constituency, Colebrook, New Minas and Wolfville collect used eyeglasses not only in May, but year-round. And whereas these used eyeglasses are cleaned and sorted by prescription at the Canadian Lions Eyeglass Recycling Centre and distributed free of charge to people needing glasses in developing countries by Lions International and other charitable organizations from across Canada that operate free eye examination clinics. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates the Colebrook, New Minas and Wolfville Lions Clubs for their contribution to the 30,000 plus sets of eyeglasses collected in Nova Scotia each year that will help people in the developing countries around the world. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Joey Brannon is believed to be one of the oldest known men with Down syndrome at the age of 63, and whereas Joey Brannon, upon learning of his church's mission and the kids program, was motivated in his desire to help children in need of such basic necessities as food, clothing, and shelter. And whereas Joey Brannon went from being a largely nonverbal individual to speaking with friends, family, and anyone else he met about the needs of children and asking for their pennies to help provide the necessary needs of life to these kids, and thereby raising over $4,500 for the mission and kids program. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize the accomplishments and the efforts of Joey Brannon to raise money for the missions and kids programs to help provide children with the basic necessities of life. Mr. Speaker, request waiver, notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Heart and Stroke Walkability Awards were established in 2011 to recognize those communities, schools, workplaces, and public institutions that have taken steps to improve the walkability of our surroundings or built environments. And whereas the Waterfront Development Corporation Limited was awarded one of the inaugural Walkability Awards for its multifaceted approach to increasing the walkability of Halifax's waterfront through the development of a network of boardwalks and trails. And whereas the Waterfront Development Corporation Limited is encouraging walking and active living by providing safe, uninterrupted access 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to one of the most visited destinations in our province. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates the Waterfront Development Corporation Limited on winning the 2011 Heart and Stroke Walkability Award and for its ongoing commitment to improving the health and wellness of Nova Scotians and enhancing the walkability of our historic waterfront. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day. As we begin oral question put to ministers by members, I remind all honourable members that the use of Blackberries, laptops, and any other electronic devices is not permitted during question period, so they are to remain off during that time period. Oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 3:46. It will end at 5:16. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Today, the Auditor General tabled a report on the Industrial Expansion Fund. He stated that the IEF has, and I quote, few processes, controls, or documentation to support the review and evaluation of applications for loans or other assistance, and a recently established advisory committee has no oversight rules, end of quote. This confirms what our caucus has been saying all along. that the IEF is simply a political slush fund for cabinet ministers to dole out hundreds of millions of dollars. So my question to the Premier, why has the Premier not taken any action on the Industrial Expansion Fund since he took office 2 years ago?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we did. We took a lot of steps to try and improve the operations of the Industrial Expansion Fund. We appointed the advisory committee. We hired a new director, a new financial officer. We strengthened the management of the fund itself. In fact, many of the recommendations that the Auditor General was asking for in his report had started to be put in place. But, Mr. Speaker, we also agree that this, of course, was a piece of legislation and a fund that was introduced in the 1950s by the Liberals under Angus L. MacDonald. And it is a fact, Mr. Speaker, that it has worn out its ability to respond in the modern context. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to announce that we will be winding up the fund and putting in place a new vehicle whereby we'll be able to support business in this province.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Auditor General said the advisory committee that the government has put in place had no teeth at all, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, he identified one loan where they recommended that they not proceed, and government ignored that recommendation and proceeded spending taxpayers' money against the wishes of people who had looked at that business case and said it does not warrant spending our money on. Mr. Speaker, let me remind the Premier that it was only a year ago that his government refused the Auditor General's access to the IEF documents. This resulted in the denial of an audit by the Auditor General, a serious black mark on the NDP government and the first in our country. The Premier could have addressed this problem a year ago, but he continued his veil of secrecy around the IEF. He could have addressed this problem by accepting our bill, which would have taken the financial decisions out of the hands of politicians, but it was too busy doling out hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Premier, why did the Premier decide to spend a record $260 million in the IEF in the first 2 years instead of fixing what is clearly a political slush fund?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is good at fabricating history, but that's not what happened. What had happened, in fact, Mr. Speaker, is that we strengthened the Auditor General's office by bringing forward legislation that specifically provides for the documentation and information that he requested and needed, and in fact allowed him to complete the report that he completed today. Mr. Speaker, what the Auditor General did not address in his report, of course, was the performance of the IEF, which, of course, has been successful at 98% of the time. And, Mr. Speaker, the last analysis of the IEF showed that it returned to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia $3 for every one that was invested.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, this Premier and this government knew that the IEF was nothing more than a political slush fund. Their response to that was to deny the Auditor General access to the records around the IEF so he could make it 2 years ago. Mr. Speaker, the response to that was to dole out hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars, a record set by a government in this province when they knew clearly there were problems with it, Mr. Speaker. This government turned a blind eye so they could dole out our money under the guise of saying economic development, when very clearly it was nothing more than a political slush fund for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, 2 years ago, he knew. I heard someone mention slush fund. If you want to talk about integrity and public money, I'll be more than willing to stand in this house.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your final supplementary and your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Premier and his government want to talk about trust, I'll talk about this Premier spending $10 million of barrister fees, Mr. Speaker.
Question, please.
I'll talk about
Order, please. Order, please. Question.
Knew 2 years ago, if he knew 2 years ago it was a slush fund, why did it take him so long to respond and hide from the Auditor General?
The Honourable Leader, the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it didn't take us that long. In fact, we moved to put in place the advisory committee, Mr. Speaker, almost right away, which, contrary to what the Leader of the Opposition said, was not ignored. Their information, in fact, was very helpful, and these are dedicated Nova Scotians who provided their time and expertise, Mr. Speaker, to the government, and the members opposite should be ashamed of themselves for suggesting otherwise. And further, Mr. Speaker, I've been in this House since 1998, and I've been here and I watched while members of the Liberal Party doled out money to Arenda Recip, to Dynatech, to Mac Timber, that put money into companies that went bankrupt 4 months after they gave them the money, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General confirmed today that this government added $75 million to the Industrial Expansion Fund in 2010, a record amount. In fact, in the IEF 2010 annual report, the government boasted, and I quote, "Through the IEF, the province invested more than ever before to assist Nova Scotia businesses." Well, Mr. Speaker, what did taxpayers get in return? The loss of thousands of jobs. In fact, as we know from the most recent Statistics Canada report, we are down 14,700 full-time jobs since that government took over. And so my question to the Premier is this: can he tell the House today how he managed to spend $75 million and lose 14,700 jobs for his efforts?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's just a fabrication, and he knows that the month-over-month employment numbers are continuing to climb, Mr. Speaker, so he's quite right. It is simply not true. The reality is that the investment that we have made in jobs in this province are very important, and I wonder if the member opposite is serious that he would not invest in companies like Irving Shipyards that are bidding on the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy, if they would not invest in the success of homegrown companies. I wonder if that's what he's telling Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier is talking about investments his government has not yet made. He's talking about some hypothetical future investment. But the fact of the matter is, during the time that his government was spending $75 million through the IEF, we were losing jobs by the thousands. That is a fact, as per the Statistics Canada Labour Force Characteristics tables, that when they're good, the Premier likes to quote, but when they're bad, as they've been for the last 2 years, he thinks that they're fabrications. Well, Mr. Speaker, Statistics Canada didn't make it up, and neither did the annual report of the Industrial Expansion Fund, which says they made the largest expense in the history of the province. And so my question to the Premier is this: does he really believe that spending $75 million to put 15,000 Nova Scotians out of work is a good use of taxpayers' money?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Conservative Party insists in indulging in a fantasy that is simply not true. The reality is that we are engaged. We are engaged in the building of an economy in this province, and I would like to point out that the parties that sit opposite from us in this legislature have governed this province for the last 20 years when we had the worst economic record in the country.
The The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we have the tabled opinion of the Auditor General. We have tabled the Statistics Canada reports. The Premier will not accept them. I guess I'll have to find a report from the Canadian Labour Congress before he'll believe a number from any other source other than them, Mr. Speaker. Fact of the matter is, in the IEF annual report, the government said, and I quote, "Our economy must grow in order to meet the serious fiscal challenges facing the province. That's why we increased the fund by $75 million. Those are the words of his own government. The highest increase in the IEF in the history of the province. And what did we get for it? We lost thousands of jobs. The Auditor General says that we should have true measures of outcomes before making these types of investments. And so my question to the Premier is this: will he admit that whatever their goal was from that $75 million, that Statistics Canada says it's a total failure?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, I'll say this, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Conservative Party should know failure when he sees it, because he's been part of it long enough. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that in fact the last consulting report into the IEF said that the fund returned to taxpayers almost $3 for every dollar invested, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since taking office, this NDP has spent records amount of money through the IEF. This is a fund that has, and I quote the Auditor General here, few processes, controls, or documentation to support and review and evaluate of applications for loans and other assistance. In only 2 years, this NDP government has doled out over $260 million through this fund, Mr. Speaker. That is $260 million of hard-earned taxpayers' dollar from Nova Scotians, and the only people with any oversight whatsoever are the NDP cabinet members. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development is, how could this minister have spent hundreds of millions of dollars when he knew full well that there was no control, no oversight, no standards, and no measures of transparency or accountability? You said it.
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the IEF, you know, I'm trying to understand the questioning. We got an IEF that's been around for 60 years. When we came into government, we implemented a strategy called Jobs Here. This was a strategy that was an update strategy. It was an update strategy with not only it was a strategy complete. It was a strategy, Mr. Speaker, complete with a business plan. What we tried to do initially is try to use an